You are listening to Adventures in Sustainable Business with Jurgensen and Peterson.
Join the adventurous exploration of sustainable business. In this episode of Adventures in Sustainable Business, Sveinung, we are very happy to have a visitor, Nancy Bocken, who is professor in sustainable business at Maastricht University, also affiliated with Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, the co-founder of a company called Homey, the project leader of the research project CircularX, and many other things. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
We have to ask you, as every podcaster asks their guests, where does this podcast find you?
I'm actually in the Netherlands now, in Maastricht, where it's very foggy, so I cannot see very far. So it's very good to concentrate on this podcast. So that's great.
And many of our listeners, Nancy, I'm sure will be familiar with your work both on sustainable business models and also on circular business models. You've written many central pieces in the literature on those issues and those themes. But recently we were happy to see your new paper with Samuel Short, which is entitled Unsustainable Business Models. So there's something in that title that indicates, that this will tell us something about what the problem is. Why do we need this solution that is called sustainable business models, or for that matter, circular business models? So what is it about all these business models that are unsustainable?
Yeah, so what we noticed actually, because I'm a very positive person by nature, so I thought when maybe naively I wrote a paper with several co-authors in 2014 on sustainable business models, I thought if you just give people the right examples of what are sustainable business models, they will go with it and they will start innovating. Of course, we found out that it's partially true, but it's also partially very untrue. So we basically looked into various sectors and we saw that a lot of unsustainable business models are really overlooked business models. So that's why we call them institutionalized unsustainable business models. So we're part of it every day. So it's ingrained in how we behave, how businesses behave, how policy reacts to it. And we don't even try to prevent it really. So this is for how this idea on unsustainable business models really emerged. So basically, we saw it in many sectors. I don't know whether I can expand a little bit on it.
Please do.
Please do. So in many sectors, we actually saw various unsustainable business models. So, for instance, in the energy sector, it's very much focused on burning fossil fuels. That is mainly the most obvious one. But we also see it in social media that tries to get you hooked and addicted, leading to very unsustainable behaviors, making people unhappier. I think Instagram is the platform on social media that makes people unhappiest. So even the people who launched some of these platforms are now backing out of them and saying maybe we shouldn't do these unsustainable business models focused on maybe addictive behavior to the platform or creating an image that is too perfect to really be true. So this is more the social media part, energy sector, but also things that we wear every day, like clothing. Like we see that clothing production has doubled over the years, whereas clothing utilization has almost halved over the same time. So we see that we maybe buy more and more, and that's maybe not very good if we don't wear all those clothes. And I was also triggered by this through a podcast in the Netherlands, actually organized by a Dutch news radio focused on business. And I was also challenged actually on seemingly sustainable business models. So we might know secondhand platforms such as Vinted or maybe other secondhand clothing platforms that are supposed to be very sustainable. But what some of those journalists notice is that people might actually buy more because they think, oh, it's secondhand, so I buy more and more. So basically, even some of those sustainable platforms also need to be designed with intent to prevent them from becoming unsustainable business models. And those are some of the things that we're currently working on in the research agenda as well, to prevent sustainable business models from becoming unsustainable. I hope you're still following this.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it was very interesting to read. And we started a new course yesterday, a course that we've been running for many years. But we started it out with the first lecture yesterday, and we used this paper as a starting point. What is the problem? Why do we need? Because the title of the course is Sustainable Business Models. But then, why do we need it? And as you said, going back to 2014, 2016, we, as you might have had that idea that if we just kind of told everyone what the goal was, then we could move the companies there. But then, what is really the problem here? And as you, when I listen to you, and then as always think about myself and my own life, this is woven into my life. It's the clothes that I wear, the food that I eat, the way I transport myself, and you have. Here you dig into 9 sectors, if I remember it correctly, and look at each of them, and what do they bring of good, and what are the problems that they are creating right now, and what do we need to move these companies from the unsustainable to the sustainable business. And if you take us back then to 2014, I guess, when you wrote that the archetypes of the sustainable business models. What did you think back then? And tell us a little bit about what you expected in these years to come.
Yeah, first of all, was after the period of completing a PhD more on the environmental part of innovation and sustainable innovation. And within that, I focused a lot more on product innovation. But I noticed that product innovations in themselves are often not enough to create a sustainable impact, and that you really need to have a good business model to support it. So what does that mean? For instance, if you have something that is recyclable, you need to enable the customer to recycle it through a take back system, for instance. It sounds pretty simple. Or if you make a durable product, make sure that people know that it's durable and that it lasts forever, and give them, for instance, a warranty. So there are a couple of things that you can do with the business model dynamics. And that was really the starting point of this overview. And what we noticed in 2014 also is that a lot of this research was disparate in different areas. So we had either people working on clean tech, very much like clean energy, renewable energy, that was their thing, and also investors were looking into that separately. And then you had the whole social dimension, social entrepreneurs often solving problems in developing areas, and that was a very different area. And we basically thought, well, there's a lot of things that you can do together, and we tried to basically create a comprehensive platform or overview of sustainable business models, because we saw that was all in separate places. So this is how we basically came up with this overview of sustainable business model archetypes, by really looking at what is happening in literature and in practice, and bringing this together in a comprehensive overview of sustainable business model archetypes. So even back then, we looked at what is industry doing, what are academia doing, how can we bring it together in a concrete overview that can help businesses forwards.
I like this concept that you used of the business model dynamics, and how does one aspect of a business model in some sense point towards or entail some other. Like you say, if you have a very durable product, well, that should inform the price point that you set, and other characteristics like the warranty, how you communicate around the product, and so on. And in, if we look at your archetypes, you have all these different characteristics of more sustainable business models, where whether we're talking about something like accessing products rather than owning them, it could be things like take back that you mentioned, and so on. And I'm wondering, now that you've done this analysis of these 9 different sectors with regard to unsustainability, you said something about how this unsustainability is institutionalized in some form. And are you seeing, how should I phrase it, sort of shared characteristics of these business models? Are there some root causes, if you know what I mean, that you see as being similar across different domains? Because here we're talking about everything from, like you said, energy to textiles to media to finance. But are there some characteristics of business models, as they are all around us, that are sort of root causes that you think are especially important to change in order to move these business models from being fundamentally unsustainable to becoming sustainable?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. And I think one of the things that has been bugging me and is very difficult to solve is the business model around quantity over quality. So, how do you solve that? So, as a business, you want to have some continuity, of course. But how do you make that continuity sustainable? So, for instance, Oatly, a Swedish brand, we did a study with them a couple of years ago, and we had a discussion on what is sustainable growth. And apparently, they also had internal discussions on which products are really necessary and which ones are not. Like, is ice cream necessary or not? So you can have
I think
very
Sveinung thinks that ice cream is necessary.
yeah, very necessary. I think most people thought it was still necessary. But there's a couple of things that sort of cut across all the archetypes, and I think that's quantity over quality. So how do we solve that? Like, can we think about better business models that prolong the lifetime of products, or even with food, can you think about better quality food, but maybe having less meat and fish, but of a better quality? So I think that is very much inherent in a lot of the business models. Another one is this complex, opaque, global value chain model. I think it's even some of the best in class, like Patagonia, found issues in their third and fourth tier suppliers. So with our global value chains, this is very much ingrained and something that needs to be solved. I think for some of the ones, some companies might think they don't do it, like this environmental and human resource exploitation. But again, when you go to the second and third or fourth tier suppliers, you definitely find some of that. And some of it is also accepted, like chopping down trees to clear land to mine, etc. And I think that will also need to change. And I think there's initiatives. 30 by 30, I think it's called. So by 2030, we need to protect 30% of the land and the oceans, basically. I think the Biden administration has also signed up for that. So I think by protecting more of our planet, our oceans, basically, I think that could be one of the solutions to avoid some of that ingrained degradation, really.
Nancy, when we look at your work over all of these years, not that many years, but all of your work in these rather few years, because you've been very productive. In the middle here, between 2014 and 2021, one thing that shines for me is your work on experimentation for sustainable business model innovation. And we can talk more about this in many different ways, but you engaged heavily with companies. You started your own company as an experimentation, and you've been working with other companies as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Yeah, I think it was also born out of sort of a frustration with myself that I enjoy writing papers and I like it and I like doing research, but I also thought, how can I put this research into practice, or at least try and encourage or inspire others to also do it. And when I was at TU Delft, I think I was quite in an experimental space, I would say, like designers who already have a very experimental way of doing research, I guess. So this is also where I started the idea of Homey. Like, as a researcher, we were inspired to think about a demonstrator of our research. And I thought, well, how can you do a demonstrator of a business model? Well, the only way to do it is basically starting a business. So this frustration of maybe only being an academic doing conceptual work, plus being in the right space at the right time and having this idea really spurred me to think about experimentation. And also in a project before in the UK, it was with a large international retailer, clothing and food. It was a large retailer wanting to become circular, and that was also very interesting because you cannot change a business overnight. And their experimentation can also be a way to gradually transform some of your business operations to become more circular. And that was very exciting, experimentation with different partners, coming up with new propositions, seeing how they work in practice, maybe first starting in the retail shop and then outside of it. So for me, experimentation really became a theme that put research also into action for me.
Tell us more about Homey, because I want you to tell us more about the cases in CircularX, the project that Lars Jakob mentioned, because you have many projects there now with small and large companies from all around the world. So please take us into that landscape later. But tell us about Homey. What is it? What does it do?
Yeah, so Homey basically is about all appliances in the home. So it started off as Homey pay per use, basically. Actually, also very much inspired by the work by Arnold Tucker on product service systems and how they can drive sustainability. He wrote a very nice paper on that in 2004. And basically, in his paper, he said, like, you can deliver a 100% product, as I talked about, but you can also combine a product with a service. And the best way could be the most servitized models, and those could be the most sustainable ones. But it was a conceptual piece, and there was no empirical data behind it. But one of the models that I found very powerful was this pay-per-use model, because I thought it works for cars, for instance. For other products, when you pay-per-use, you get very conscious about how much you should be using. So we started thinking about what would be the iconic product for pay-per-use. What does everyone need? What is not maybe something that people feel very emotional about? So we landed on, basically white goods and specifically the washing machine. Started with 3 washing machines trialed in Rotterdam and Delft in the Netherlands. And so, like, does it even work, the technology? So we had an Arduino that was programmed to track basically how the washing programs were used. So basically, we had a clever engineer, a friend of a friend, basically, who managed to code this thing, because I'm not such a technical person that I can do that. But I did pick up the washing machines at the TU Delft downstairs to have them basically hacked. And this is how we started, basically, with a website also built by a friend again, who sort of built a database. So it was very much experimental, basically, the technology, the process, the people involved, a bit of lean startup, but also maybe effectuation by Sarasvati, working with resources and people you have and and building that up into a real business.
We will share the link here in the notes to the podcast episode. But I see homeypayperuse.com. Does this mean that can I order these services in Norway, or where do I have
Not
to
yet.
live by now?
Not yet, but I think the Nordic countries are very suitable for it, because there's also, for instance, in Sweden, where I lived before, you also have a lot of shared spaces and apartments and shared washing machines. So I think that would be the future. And in the Netherlands, we now also have some apartment blocks where we basically have shared washing machines already, because that would be the future, right? Yeah.
What I think is interesting about the Homey project and the paper that you've written also, where Homey is a case, and you show some of the early empirical insights from those experiments, and in some sense those are, you could say, behavioral experiments. In this, there's a business model on one side, but it's a business model that facilitates a particular kind of behavior on the part of consumers who are going to do their laundry in this regard. And I think it's such a nice illustration of how the interplay between the business model on the one hand and the behavior that it tries to facilitate on the other hand. And I was thinking about, you have a lot of experience, of course, from working with companies in different ways, and this is one example where you have a company of your own. To what degree do you see the large players that you are working with? Are they, in some sense, inspired by these smaller, experiments like this and adopting it, imitating it in their own business models? I'm thinking about Stefan Schaltegger's paper on upscaling versus upgrading, where you have this idea of the bigger players, imitating, innovative startups who are doing things in different ways. How do you see the spread of these experiments into the larger, industrial scale players?
Yeah, good question. First of all, it was really nice to be able to apply some of this academic thinking, like nudging, like Thaler and Sunstein, basically looking at some simple interventions that you can do to create a more sustainable proposition. Like we have differential pricing to stimulate sustainable behavior, like the 30-degree wash is cheaper than the 90-degree wash. For me, that sounded super simple, a simple experiment, simple idea, but in practice, it really worked. So it drove the right sustainable behaviors. Companies find that really attractive. So we've spoken with clothing retailers, even I think all major laundry equipment manufacturers. We even have a project called recips.eu. So it's about remanufacturing and product service systems that involves a large manufacturer of washing machines, of white goods. But what we notice is that when a large company tries to implement something that looks like it sort of falls back to the common behaviors, like something that works, like how to make it profitable, how to maybe immediately go for the highest segment, so to make it even more profitable than selling the normal equipment. And for us, we had a very different starting point. So the starting point was, how can we deliver something as sustainably, environmentally sustainably as possible? And then how can we make a profit out of it? I'm not sure what the best way is to build the best business. Probably the existing business does a better profitability. But I think basically we need to rethink how we do business and trial some of these crazy ideas that may not make business sense initially, but can grow and become very successful.
How is the pay per use? Because I see now that you have much more products than when I checked it maybe a year or two ago. Then it was like you started out with the washing machines and so on. But now I also see freezers and vacuum cleaners and even iron and ironing board. Do you pay per use for that as well? If you don't iron your shirt, you pay less? If you don't clean that much or vacuum that much, you also pay less? Or have you been able to build that into those products as well?
Yes, that was the idea initially, but we had a lot of discussions on it. So when we started the fridge experiment, initially we basically started with renting out the fridges and giving people nudges on how to create more sustainable behavior. So it was like a rental type of model. So we did competitions between different households, and we found that there were very significant differences in energy use, and that was really nice. So we basically work with advice to drive sustainable behavior, because we thought it's not really a workable model if you have to count the number of times someone opens the fridge. So for some models, it really became, unsustainable, maybe unpractical, basically to set up a pay-per-use model. We do it for the dryers, for the washing machines still, but for others, you cannot punish someone for cleaning the house, basically. So we didn't think that would be a.
I was hoping a little while. I was hoping. I
Maybe
was
we can
hoping.
choose. Maybe some people can
I,
choose that
I saved
option.
so much money last year because I didn't clean my house.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be nice.
So, so our different models that we now have actually were born out of the fact that some models were not so practical, pay per use, pure pay per use, and also to make it more financially viable. Like I think we already do something that is maybe counter business by offering something for free and not charging someone until the product is being used. So we did start, for instance, with a deposit. A minimum number of washes, which is still very low. So, but we had to implement a couple of things to make it, more financially viable as well as a business.
This relates to an interesting question, going back to the starting point with these unsustainable business models in all of these different sectors. In your experience now, having worked both from a research standpoint and in other roles with companies from many different industries, and having analyzed all of these different sectors of the economy, you're like you're saying now, there are some types of behaviors, some types of consumption that are perhaps easier to see how we can make them more sustainable. It could be moving from fossil driven vehicles to electrical vehicles. It could be going from cleaning our clothes on high degree to low degree, or whatever it might be. But have you seen any, do you see systematic differences across sectors in some sense, the low hanging fruit versus the things that are really, really tricky to move from their sort of these ingrained unsustainable patterns of both production and consumption? Where are you bullish and where are you less optimistic in terms of how we can move the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, I think the things that ask people to do something that is less convenient will be the most difficult ones. So I had a lot of discussions also on vegetarianism, for instance. Like some people still act surprised when I say, like, yeah, I don't eat meat for environmental reasons, and they say, why would an individual's choices matter? And I think that is something very important. Like, where can you basically um, let people know that it does matter, that their individual behavior does count. So I think this is where it gets difficult, and where as a company you need to dare to have a discussion with the customer. And I see that slowly some of the major food retailers are also trying to nudge people to maybe replace meat with something else, and I think that is slowly happening. But this choice editing is still a difficult one, and has been a difficult one, because people want convenience. People are, want something to be easy. Same with everything that is electrified. So we're trying to electrify everything from lawn mowers to toothbrushes and everything. I think this is a very bad development. It makes unnecessary noise, uses unnecessary electricity. So maybe we should also move towards more frugal innovation. And I think that will also be a very cool development. Like, only talking about frugal innovation maybe in developing, emerging countries, but why shouldn't we have more frugal innovation here as well?
I have to ask you then, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, these cases in CircularX, and maybe you could start with telling us about the CircularX project, and then we could talk more about the cases, and also this discussion that we just had now on these kinds of innovations in the companies. How do they meet? How do they react on these ideas, and how do they work? But start out by telling us about the CircularX project.
Yeah, so CircularX actually stands for experimentation with circular service business models. It was funded by the ERC, the European Research Council. It's a project that will be running for 5 years, so it's still till 2025. We have a couple of researchers, 6 researchers at the moment, working interdisciplinary on this topic of experimentation. And basically, the very simple idea is, how can we spur experimentation with circular service business models in large business, but also startups, SMEs. Basically, every company needs to become a circular company. So this is our goal. And we also focus on high impact sectors, also influenced by, amongst others, the work by Arnold Tucker, who mapped high impact sectors from an environmental perspective, such as food, mobility, energy using appliances, housing, but also we looked into clothing as one of the most unsustainable sectors on earth. So basically, that's our starting point. And we have a broad platform, but we have a couple of research questions. First, understanding what is this experimentation, looking into the practices of businesses, then developing tools and methods, and also labs. And we've done some virtual labs with companies already. And we basically, through research, want to support this circular economy transition.
I have to ask you, this is a digression really to the question, but we're going to move back into CircularX. But I was struck by this, wherever I go and talk about the circular economy, whether it's here in Norway or in other countries outside the Netherlands, everyone is pointing towards the Netherlands. The country as such, Amsterdam as sort of the circular city. And often, the look from outside is different from the look from inside. But can you say a few words about the Netherlands as a sort of circular hotspot? Because that seems to be the feeling from the outside, that so much innovation, both on the part of private companies, from municipalities and cities, and also how strikingly many Dutch researchers are in this space of circularity. What's going on there?
Well, first of all, we're partly below sea level, so that is what is going on. So I think we're pretty worried about that. So I think circular economy is seen as one of the drivers to solve climate change, basically. And I think we've really taken on this idea also of the circular economy package of the European Commission. And I think in general, we're maybe quite an innovative country, but I think that we're not so different from any other countries. When I lived in Sweden, I was surprised by the so many innovative companies there. When you go to the US, when you go to the UK, countries I visited, also researchers that contact me from emerging countries, from India, who wants to be also more circular, Australia, where it's seen as a way to tackle climate change in a slightly different way. So there's a lot of countries, continents, basically working on this topic. So I think from every continent, probably I received messages of people maybe wanting to copy or do something similar to this project, and also do something on circular economy. So yes, the Netherlands might have it as a hotspot, maybe because we're below sea level. But I think a lot is happening now in the world, and I'm positively surprised actually by all the reactions from people in the world on this topic.
And I want to follow up with another question, because something that strikes me, you mentioned TU Delft, as and I guess you have been affiliated with the school previously, or
yes, yeah.
And it's I have this impression that you're successful in the academic sphere when it comes to the circular economy and so on in the Netherlands to build these interdisciplinary connections between business, design, and architecture, and so on. How important do you think that this interdisciplinarity is, and not just in research? I'm also thinking about basically when you design and implement business models, you need these different the eyes of the engineers, the architects, the designers, and all these different disciplinary perspectives, and it seems that you're quite successful at doing that, both in the academic space and beyond.
Yeah, I think a lot of the universities we're a small country, so a lot of the universities are near business hubs as well. A lot of the projects that we do at our universities are often with companies as well. I think at TU Delft it was one of the first circular design courses that was founded there. In Maastricht, we have a sustainable business masters that was launched this year, where also circular economy is a big topic. So I think universities are probably physically near businesses, and generally I think there's a lot of collaboration as well. We call it transdisciplinarity as well. That's sort of the boundaries between what is practice and what is research are sort of blurred as well. So I think this collaborative culture does exist, but I also found it in Sweden and in England actually. So.
I want to take us back to those cases, and here we have the chance to talk about both the kind of the global initiatives and companies and the ones from Netherlands. So you could talk about both and tell us about some of these examples and how you work with them.
Yeah. So maybe in the Netherlands, we worked with Swapfiets, for example. So they already have a bicycle subscription model, and they basically wanted to be even more circular than they are, and exploring different types of experimentations with their business models. So we did some virtual and face-to-face workshops with them, and also a recent survey. Also did some desk and interview studies with companies like H&M and Philips. Really nice, because you see that they are experimenting with the second-hand refurbishment, all kinds of things that are very exciting. So I was very curious about how they do it, basically. So I interviewed them about their practices and their struggles in the process. So those are some of the things that we do as well. Also did a workshop with Polestar on their, they already have like a renewable electric car, but how can they maybe change their business model and even make it better? So we have done during the pandemic, of course, constraints by some of the physical parts, done some virtual workshops, but also a lot of desk studies on how companies experiment with their business models. So, and also this is part of this database. So we have this CircularX database, and there we try to find specifically what those practices are, and we try to also do interviews, very short ones, with the companies to develop the cases. and also find what the environmental impact improvement is. That's not always easy to find because that is sort of still a blind spot. But for some of the cases, we did find, what the environmental impact improvement also is of that experimentation, because this is one of the research gaps, but also one of the practice gaps, I guess.
I will want to encourage all our listeners to check out the CircularX.eu website, and it's such a rich, a rich database, if you will, of cases and examples and insights, and it's really inspiring to see. And I'm intrigued, Nancy, when you say this project is running until 2025. I think you said. So that means that there's still lots of work to do, and lots of insights to emerge from the project. And you have this two-way, or sort of the academic perspective that you're sort of articulating very well here, and also this practical business savvy perspective. So I like this dual approach that I think is very clear in this project. And I wanted to ask you, with regard to both of those, what can we expect to see in these years to come? What are the big questions that are unanswered as you see them with regard to the circular economy, and also what will be the next steps that these companies that are trying to become more circular, what are the sort of unanswered practical questions, if you will, for those companies that are trying to succeed with this in practice?
Yeah, so one of them already mentioned, so that's the environmental impact of all of these initiatives. So one of my PhD researchers, Ankita Das, she did a review on to what extent companies basically review and assess the impact of some of their initiatives. And she basically found that a lot of companies use something that looks like life cycle assessment, but a lot of them don't really assess the impact of their current or the future business models. So that is really a gap. So she's working on tools that guide companies in this process. So when they develop a service model, how can they avoid rebound effects, etc., etc. So this is one of the areas that is still quite big. Another one is, I think in the past, a lot of the models focused on recycling. A lot of the business models focused on recycling, and we want to focus more on slowing the loop. And one of my researchers, Laura Niesen, so she's in the CircularX team, she's basically developing a database of sufficiency-based business practices. What does it mean? So it basically means the slow consumption as part of the business model. And she's basically looking into different types of examples across the different industries. So I think that will also be very exciting to see. And then tools and methods. I think companies like to use their own tools and methods. So lean startup, for instance, I also applied to a more practical research project in the past. And companies like that to build, measure, learn loops. But can we maybe derive other tools that are maybe circular economy specific and can guide them also into more sustainable and not only more financially viable propositions? So these are some of the things that we're developing. And we will have some early workshops online and tools that we're going to trial within the next year already. So that should be exciting. Deliverables not until 2024, 2025, but we want to lean startup ourselves into early tools and methods to already support businesses early on and not wait until the end of the project, basically.
I want to once again take us back to the starting point here. As you understand, Nancy, we were very inspired by your paper on unsustainable business models. And there's one figure in the paper, to be very specific, it's figure 1 on page 11, for those who might have the PDF in front of them. It's a sort of... it looks a little bit like an onion, circles inside circles, and it's the figure is essentially an illustration of the hierarchy, is what you write, of the sustainable business model archetypes. And you could read it, I guess, as a form of levels of ambition, if you will, in sustainable business modeling. And what I really am so encouraged by is that the things that we used to think of as being super ambitious goals, becoming net zero, for instance, is quite far down in that hierarchy. And if we look up in the hierarchy, we see things like you mentioned the sufficiency economy, making do with less, living smarter lifestyles, frugal innovation you used as a concept earlier as well. You also mentioned, I believe, earlier the regenerative economy, or one of us mentioned it. I don't remember who of us said it. And at the top, you have this flourishing economy. Is the field moving as quickly? And I mean out in the real world. Should managers sleep shorter nights and get up earlier because the speed of innovation towards these more ambitious types of sustainability innovation, like the regenerative business models, efficiency-based business models, and so on, are they coming quickly?
Yeah, I think I really like it that you read the paper in so much detail. And for me, it was also encouraging to see that efficiencies and what I call narrowing the loop and using less materials per product, that is becoming more evident because it saves costs while it saves resources at the same time. Net zero, I think, is now on everyone's business agenda. Circular economy is also becoming the bread and butter of businesses. But then the more difficult ones come, as you observed as well, like the sufficiency economy, making do with less, being net positive and regenerative, and finally having a totally different view on what the economy is. And this idea of flourishing, also from John Ehrenfeld, but also Kate Raworths, with Doughnut Economics, is really thinking about rethinking what this future economy should look like. When I have conversations about this, people say even we shouldn't talk about economy anymore because the economy is nothing without the planet and society. It's some artifact or something that we invented ourselves. So I think what we want to show with this figure is that there's a transition that is necessary. And I think at all levels, there are businesses that are already think like that, but it's not yet the majority. So some banks, finance, people in the finance sector are thinking about flourishing. Some people are thinking about doing less, sufficiency economy. I saw people doing experiments with shorter work weeks, basic universal income, this Finnish experiment. So when you said, should people sleep less, I think they should sleep more and maybe work less. So that could be part more of the sufficiency economy, because income is very much correlated to environmental impact. So maybe we should all do a little less. Could be also a nice way to conclude.
Is that
Yeah.
how you live your brand, Nancy? You sleep more and work less. We've talked through now the last 6 or 7 years with
Probably the
all the
opposite.
papers and the company you started, and also the project that you're running. And I'm happy to see that you're building teams. I see that on CircularX. You're a team now, and I know that you work a lot with other researchers as well. But if you sleep a lot, I'm quite curious on how effective you are when you're awake.
I'm a bad example of my own own figure, basically. No, but I think we need to rethink what this economy or what our future society looks like. I think Ehrenfeld, Kate Raworths, many other thinkers have thought about this. And should we even have an economy? If it is an economy, it shouldn't probably optimize economic impact, but more the benefits or the health of society and the natural environment. There's plenty of evidence that also says that if we have a healthy environment, a green environment, people are also happier. So I think all of these are interlinked, and there's plenty of evidence. But I think this awareness needs to grow even more, that we're sort of optimizing the wrong thing at the moment. I think that is a simple thing that this figure is telling us, that we should work towards optimizing the right thing, and that's not the economy, basically.
We are happy, Nancy, that you are. We want you to sleep well, but we are happy that you are working and writing these papers that really that really bring out so much of what the problem is, where we started this conversation. But even more importantly, of course, what the solutions might be, whether those solutions are circular, whether they are regenerative, or they are at the highest level of ambition here, the flourishing business models. The truth is, we could keep you here and talk until next week or next month. But we have covered a lot of ground in this conversation, Nancy, and we are very grateful that you joined us for this chat about sustainable business models here in Adventures in Sustainable Business.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you today. It was really nice.
You have listened to Adventures in Sustainable Business with Jurgensen and Peterson.
Visit us at jurgensenpeterson.no, where you can find more information about this podcast and other information about our work. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review.